Hello, and welcome to another episode of Dead Times, the only horror movie podcast recorded in the loft of a barn while a movie screening is going on. I'm your host, Peter, and with me, as always, is local celebrity victim, Tim. Tim, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, and tonight we are finishing up with Scream 4. So is this the first horror movie
There's no more Scream.
There is no
None
more.
more Scream.
So is this the first horror franchise you watched from beginning to latest installment?
The first with more than one movie, yeah. Yeah, I guess it is. Oh, that's weird to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, how are you feeling now that our journey through Scream is at an end until they make another one?
um, I'm gonna miss the characters. I'm gonna miss the world. Probably not enough to try to watch the TV show. Yeah, it feels. I mean, I sort of got all my feelings of completion out of the way with Scream 3, since the first three movies were such a unit unto themselves,
Hmm.
and this is definitely, sort of a separate thing, while still earnestly being a part of the franchise. Yeah, most of that kind of sense of looking back on the journeys of the characters and the length of the story. I got most of those out of the way last time we covered a Scream movie. This really does feel sort of like a bonus.
It's sort of in its own way like one of those revival series where they get the cast back together for one more season. I
Yeah,
feel,
which Hayden Panettiere knows about.
but I feel like this is much better than how most of those turn out. That
Yeah.
this is still very much the voice of Scream.
Yeah, and it's better because everybody involved looks happy to be there.
Well, like both the characters in the movie itself and all of the actors seem excited to sort of be. Well, I guess the characters are not necessarily excited to be in this situation again, but they seem excited to be doing or be around each other and doing what they kind of love to do.
Yeah.
Um, and then the actors obviously seem.
Yeah, exactly. Or what they've had to do at the
Mhm.
very least.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gail even makes that speech to Dewey. He's like, "Come on, it's you and me.
Mhm.
You got to let me help."
What are your overall thoughts about this movie?
It's a really cool movie. I don't know how I would rank it quality wise with the rest of the series because it feels a little tonally different, which feel is sort of inevitable. It being made 11 years right
Yeah,
later.
11 years later.
Yeah, so there are some differences there, and I feel like, especially since the main arcs of the characters were really completed in Scream 3, there's not quite as much sort of character richness in this movie as in
Mhm.
the previous three movies, because there isn't really a further place the movie takes them to, because it doesn't really have to. It's more sort of checking in on these characters to see how they've been doing, rather than sort of moving them to any place they'll be in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gale gets the most of a traditional character arc in this movie.
But
Uh,
it's also in it the least.
yeah, but yeah, this is obviously you mentioned this was a movie filmed 11 years after the fact, and it really is that we missed these characters in this world, and so we're revisiting them. Not necessarily that well this is an unfinished story. It's like a reminder about how much we enjoyed them the first time around. Which again isn't to say like there's
Yeah,
the only value this movie has is nostalgia, but it is undeniably nostalgic.
no.
If I were to say this movie has the movie's biggest weakness is that is a little bit cranky and thinks kids these days are awful. There is a lot of
Well,
slamming
I mean,
on.
Wes Craven is Wes Craven is what, like 147 these days. You got to forgive the man a little bit.
Yeah, no, this movie occasionally there are some of the younger cast are it's very fond of Kirby. I think the movie is very fond of, but there's a lot of kids are
Well, how
terrible.
could you not be?
Yeah, but there's a lot of kids are terrible in this movie.
Yeah, although I don't know, I feel like this franchise has always done that.
Mhm.
Like there's the core cast of, there's Sydney, and there's, in the first movie and a half, there's Randy. but there's been a lot of asshole teenagers in this franchise.
Mhm.
You know, some of them turning out to be murderers.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you aren't Sidney, Gale, or Dewey, then you're either a murder victim or a murderer, pretty much.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of how it goes.
Mhm. Which is something
Um,
this movie repeatedly calls out.
yeah, there's a little bit of get off my lawn in this movie.
Well, the other thing about this movie is that this movie is basically a remake, except for the fact that because it's Scream, it's a remake where the characters from the original are there commenting on it being a remake.
Yeah, pretty much.
Everything is drawn pretty heavily from the original Scream. A lot of the set pieces are the same type of things that the original Scream did. Just a lot of stuff that happens is identical to what happened in the original Scream. And then a lot of the characters are either directly homages to the characters from the original Scream, or they took two characters from the original Scream and sliced them together. Like Deputy Judy is Dewey.
Yeah, basically.
For
But it's
Walt,
weird because Dewey is actually there.
yeah, no, that's what this movie does. Is the fact that it takes them or takes these characters, makes them homages, and yet the characters from the original movie are there commenting on how similar things are and how terrible remakes are.
I was gonna say that's something that this franchise has messed around with before because in the last movie we had two Gales running around. You know, kind of by bringing the Stab franchise into the story. It's sort of been messing around with that for a while of having these sort of mock-ups of characters wandering around doing stuff, but then interacting with the characters that they're a reference to, and being critiqued by them a lot. So it's very much in character with the franchise, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, Kirby is just Tatum combined with Randy. Rebecca is just Gale. Robbie is Randy combined with Gale. It's like all these characters are
And Jill is the worst possible version of Sydney.
exactly, which is something that the movie goes out of its way to comment on repeatedly about how Jill is just Sydney reworked and terrible. But yeah, let's jump into Scream 4 with the typical Scream prologue, which is very atypical
Uh-huh.
in the fact that we wind up getting
Yeah.
we get multiple prologues in this movie.
Yeah, and I was again like many things about this franchise, I was into it, but it took me right up to the point where I was about to say bullshit. But it didn't quite go over that line,
Yeah.
which is kind of a big strength of these movies.
Yeah, because at first we have two girls getting harassing text messages from a guy who's using the picture of Channing Tatum, and then they're immediately killed by two ghost faces. At which point it's revealed that that is the that is the beginning of Stab 6, which leads to Anna Paquin and Kristen Bell sitting on a couch talking about how terrible horror
Kristen
is.
Bell.
Talking about how, oh, horror movies is just a bunch of articulate teenagers deconstructing horror cliches, and it's not surprising and not shocking. And then Kristen Bell just ups and stabs Anna Paquin in the stomach, which is revealed to be the start of Stab 7. And then that leads into...
Yeah, and there's just a part of me that wants to scream bullshit at this, but I can't. Maybe it's because I can't find any fault with Kristen Bell, but it still really worked for me.
The more times I've seen it, the more I've appreciated it. Like, I feel like the first time I saw it and I didn't know that was coming, I was like, oh, come on. But you know what? It's there to remind you that Stab
Right.
is still incredibly important to this franchise. It's kind of absurd how important Stab is to this franchise, because so much revolves around Stab.
Yes, especially considering it's not an element at all in the first one.
Mhm.
Like, it's the longest and most important running thread in the plots of these movies, but it doesn't have anything. Well, I mean, indirectly it has everything to do with the events of the first movie, but it's not a factor in the first movie at all, which is really interesting.
After that, it segues into the actual prologue, which is where Jenny and Marnie are watching Stab 7 and commenting on the Stab franchise, which the first three Stabs were obviously based on the events of the first three Screams. And then afterwards, they just kept making movies, even though apparently Sydney
Which,
sued them.
again, that's got to be we talked about this in Scream 3. That's got to be against some libel laws.
Yeah, I was deeply amused when you mentioned that in earlier episodes of this podcast because I knew that yeah, they were going to just make shit up for the Stab franchise. Uh, which apparently one of the movies
Yep.
involves time travel and like Sydney sued
Right.
them and yeah, there's this whole bizarre backstory to what happened between Scream 3 and now for Stab of all things. But yeah, Jenny and Marnie are watching some Stab and of course they start getting menacing phone calls and Marnie vanishes, and then Jenny gets attacked by Ghostface, and then is subsequently killed. So, what did you think about the actual prologue part of the prologue?
I thought it worked really well. Maybe it's just because, again, as you pointed out, like many things in this movie, it does really harken back to the first prologue, or the prologue from the first movie, which I really appreciated because I love that sequence. And I thought the first prologue was the best of the original three prologues. So it was really cool to see some of those beats again, but have it still stand on its own. You know, it's not just a callback. Yeah, I thought it was a really good sequence. And you are sort of on your toes after the first three movies. As a number of characters say in this movie, this is a reboot. There are different rules now, and so you're trying to figure out what that's going to be, sort of right off the bat. Yeah, I thought it worked really well.
Interestingly, also like the original prologue, there is a giant clue in it as to who the eventual killer is. That these characters were picked for a very specific reason, or not characters, these people were picked for a very specific reason to be murdered first, which you don't really notice until you watch it the second time.
Yeah, I don't even know what that is. I'll have to go back and look.
Yeah, Jenny, when she gets a call, they keep thinking it's Trevor calling her. And then as the movie unfolds, Jenny is revealed to be the character that Trevor cheated on Jill with.
Okay. Oh man, I totally missed that. Okay, yeah, that makes loads of sense.
There are a couple of really interesting subtle clues as to who the killer is scattered throughout this movie. I think it's actually the best at providing literal clues as opposed to what the previous Screams did, which was sort of making you think a character, well, in the first one, making you think a character was guilty just by how they sort of lit him and presented him in the movie.
Yeah, and I didn't catch any of those, which is another reason I'd like to watch it again. It makes sense.
When you get to talking about Kirby's house, I will reveal yet another clue that was a dead giveaway as to who the killer was if you were paying attention.
I apparently wasn't.
The prologue definitively throws you back into the world of Scream, as both this is what Scream does, obviously, as well as commenting on the state of horror and just commenting on the very nature of Scream. Since the first segment of the prologue contains a whole lot of comments and criticisms of the Saw movies, and then the second one, of course, then turns around and winds up commenting and criticizing Scream itself.
Yeah, which the movie does a lot. There's the drinking games that are proposed at the Stab Marathon, which are all based on tropes from the Scream franchise. The guys standing at the front of the auditorium, the barn, like get ready to take a shot every time someone closes the refrigerator door, only to realize that a harmless character was standing behind them.
Yeah, the other thing the prologue does is definitively set this back in Woodsboro, which Scream 3 was making fun of horror movies by making their Stab 3 back to Woodsboro. So of course Scream 4 goes back to Woodsboro. You gotta love this franchise.
Yeah.
There is so much to love about these movies.
Yeah, the mission of this franchise seems to be to satirize the movie that they're making, rather than any movie up to that point. Like Scream 2 doesn't sort of poke fun at Scream 1. It pokes fun at Scream 2 while Scream is happening. And that's exactly what this one does. Like, this one doesn't just sort of comment on the earlier Scream franchise. It's commenting on itself, on its own status as a reboot and as sort of a revisitation of an older franchise, which takes a lot of balls, and I'm not really sure how you do that, but it's very impressive.
So let's dive into the main thrust of this movie and get reacquainted with our characters who have had 10 years of their lives pass by. I believe the first one who actually shows up on screen is Dewey, and Dewey is now the sheriff of Woodsboro, and seemingly everyone knows him. and he seemingly knows everyone in that entire city. So good for Dewey.
Yeah, and that feels really right.
They spent all of Scream 3 sort of talking about how Dewey wanted to stay in Woodsboro, and so he stayed in Woodsboro, and he worked his way up to sheriff. So good for Dewey.
Yeah, and that makes a nice sort of culmination of his sort of his increasing competence from
Mm-hmm.
the first three movies. You know, because he starts out as kind of the new guy. You know, and he's a little. Again, we talked about this in the first episode on the franchise, that he's not incompetent, but he's a little green,
He's a little
and that
easily
he just
distracted.
gets sort of yeah, and he gets subsequently more and more competent and more capable as the movies go on. So him eventually becoming sheriff does feel really satisfying.
But yeah, that is exactly where you'd sort of expect Dewey to wind up. And it's nice because of the fact that Dewey being a police officer was sort of lost for Scream 2 and Scream 3. I'm not sure what he was doing in
Yeah,
Scream 2, and in Scream 3 he's working as sort of as a film consultant. So it was nice to like revisit a Dewey who sort of found his place in the world.
yeah, that is really gratifying to see.
All right, and then also good for Dewey, he and Gail are married and still together.
Yep,
Was that
they're kind of making it work.
did that surprise you that they were divorced?
Not really. I think that's how I would have expected it, because that would have been really mean. You know, it's already a little mean to open Scream 3 on "They tried and it didn't work." You know, it would have been really cruel to open Scream 4 the same way, especially after their resolution at the end of Scream 3 was so touching. So I figured even Wes Craven wouldn't have the stomach to do that.
Gail is deeply frustrated throughout this movie, and Dewey even admits that that life in Woodsboro has been very hard on her, but she is genuinely happy in their relationship up until, well, Dewey kind of freezes her out of his own investigation.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense.
Because Dewey, I don't know how to best phrase this, but Dewey sort of thinks of her as his wife as opposed to his partner, which is what they were in the previous movies.
Yeah, and there's sort of a different dynamic which they're both not totally comfortable with yet. Now that now that there's this crisis arising. Yeah. When she tries to squeeze through the reporters and ask him a question when he's giving the press conference or whatever it was, he like leans away from the microphone and is like, "Later." Which is a ridiculous interaction to have with your wife in the middle of that situation. But yeah, it feels like exactly like what Dewey thought was the right thing to do.
Yeah, Dewey clearly does think of, well, I mean, he even tells Gail that she's not a journalist anymore, which Gail herself does not view herself as not a journalist anymore. She feels sort of adrift, is I think the best way to describe Gail at the beginning of this movie.
Yeah, she's trying to write fiction, but has a block about it, which which makes some sense given the life she's led.
It's never explicitly explained what happened to Gail that she just somehow fell away from her career as a journalist. I think you can extrapolate that a lot of things sort of converge together. Scream 3 set up that while she was very successful, she had not gotten the best jobs. She was working as an entertainment reporter instead of 60 Minutes 2, which was the job she really wanted. She had her marriage to Dewey, which she genuinely seems to be trying to make work. And so she just sort of, I guess, let her career slide.
Yeah, and sort of the central conflict surrounding their relationship as portrayed in Scream 3 was that Dewey wanted to stay in Woodsboro and Gail wanted to pursue her career. You know, so when we open the movie and we see that Dewey is still, in fact, in Woodsboro and is the sheriff there, that it does sort of follow that Gail had to sacrifice a large part of her career.
Which, well, Gail obviously is going to be remembered as the author of the Woodsboro murders and multiple books on Sidney Prescott, which seems to be something that she's very comfortable with since it is a point of pride for her throughout this movie. But she's trying to write, but she just doesn't have anything to write about. And Gail has always been energized more than any other character, and really more than anything, whenever these killings start up throughout all the movies. So it sort of
Yeah, once the blood starts splattering, Gail enters her element.
Yeah, exactly. Like, she says it repeatedly throughout the movie. This is what I do. This is this is what we do. I've solved these things 3 times. And she like repeatedly says, I've still got it. And she is maybe delighted would be the wrong word, but she is excited to start tackling this new set of murders.
Yeah, and I didn't think about it until now, but we've talked before about how Gale, even more so than the other two central characters, really doesn't fit into any pre-existing slasher movie character archetype. And I was thinking that might be kind of the biggest reason why, is that, yeah, nobody else, again, it's hard to sort of find the vocabulary because, yeah, excited or happy isn't the right word, but nobody else in any other slasher movie really seems to enter their element once the killings start in the way that Gale does. So yeah, that's kind of her defining characteristic. That's kind of what makes her stand out so much as a character, which is really interesting.
Yeah, which I mean, well, Sydney and then Aaron from Your Next were both survivors who were prepared for these types of things or were capable in these types of situations. Whereas Gail is just, it's like she comes alive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's fascinating to watch. And did you feel really bad for Gail when she was first introduced?
Yeah, a bit. Yeah, because she, yeah, more than the other characters, does seem to be really lost without a crisis to be involved in, and we don't really get a whole lot of resolution for that later in the movie. You know, she kind of patches things up with Dewey, but yeah, her status as being sort of uncomfortable with the comfort of her life isn't really ever put to bed. You know, I felt like out of all the characters, this movie left Gale with the least closure, which was a little disappointing for me since Gale's my favorite character in the franchise. But I do think that the role that she has throughout the movie is really interesting and is really fitting as a place to take her character to.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's get to Sydney. Sydney has now written her own book about her experiences as a survivor of 3 homicidal attacks, and she seems to genuinely be in a very good place.
Which is refreshing.
Yeah, like
because the previous 2 movies, once we checked in on Sydney, and even the first one, kind of, it seemed like she was just kind of barely holding it together.
We talked about sort of the healing end of Scream 3, and she has healed. And she has moved on with her life and become, I don't know if comfortable is the correct word for her relationship to the multiple massacres that were carried out in her life, but she has fully moved on.
Yeah, which is again is really gratifying to see. I feel like this movie, one of the best strengths of this movie is how, you know, while still kind of niggling them and fucking with them the way that it has to as a Scream movie, it has a lot of respect for fans of the franchise, and it doesn't betray the affection that you have for any of these characters. You know, it knows that everybody wants to see Gale and Dewey making it work. It knows that everybody wants to see Sydney, you know, having a stable existence, and it gives you that, which was really nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, Scream 3, we said that it gave the characters as close to a happy ending as was possible, and that has more or less continued. I mean, there's some niggling stuff with Gale, but I mean, these characters are, as we said before, making it work.
Yeah, which is the best they could possibly hope for given what they've been through.
One of my favorite things about this movie is that, okay, so the first 2 Screams had Sydney punching Gale. Scream 3 had her sort of awkwardly hugging Gale at one point. And then Scream 4, they actually sincerely hug and are sincerely happy to see each other.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's clearly, you know, right afterwards, she's clearly a bit more happy to see Dewey because their bond is so particular. But yeah, again, that's another thing that's really, really satisfying, is seeing their relationship finally kind of settle into, you know, not close friendship, but yeah, something mutually understanding and even somewhat mutually affectionate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Gale and Sydney are ever going to be gal pals, but they like clearly are at the point where they enjoy being with each other when they're together, and they do favors for each other, and like it is just a nice that their relationship has been demonstrated to evolve over the course of all these movies. Like, would you have ever expected that when you watched the first Scream?
Well, when I watched the first Scream, I didn't know that the characters were going to come back, so I couldn't really extrapolate anything about where the rest of their stories were going to go. From Scream 2 onwards, I mean, yeah, a little bit. Just that by the fact that they're 2 of the 3 people that consistently go through everything, it makes it makes a lot of sense that that's sort of the natural course of how their relationship would evolve.
Do you think that Sydney saw Gale and Dewey a lot in the intervening 10 years?
I would imagine I would imagine so. I mean, I would imagine Sydney wouldn't want to go for too long without seeing Dewey at the very least. And their reunion didn't give me the vibe that that was like the first time they'd seen each other in like 3 years. They were excited to see each other, but it wasn't the biggest deal in the world. So yeah, yeah, I would imagine they stayed in touch.
I feel similarly, and like I feel like this, which again, Sydney and Gale's relationship reflects that. Oh, these are people who have, spent time not being attacked by serial killers together for the last like 10 years. Maybe not tons of time, but you know what?
Yes, exactly.
In addition to our returning characters, we have a whole constellation of new characters. Just there are a lot of new characters in this movie.
Yeah, more than any of the previous movies.
I think it was Wes Craven who said that, oh, if this movie does well, it could be the start of a new trilogy, which I almost 100% believe was a complete lie. Because basically all the
Yeah,
characters,
that doesn't really seem his speed.
yeah, all the characters are basically dead at the end of this movie. All the new characters are basically dead. But if you're watching it, I feel like you could very easily be like, oh, they're setting up a new Gale, a new Dewey, a new Randy, a new Sydney, and they're going to continue on with the story. And this is sort of the original characters send off to them. And then that bandage
Right.
is ripped off pretty harshly.
Well, you don't fuck with the original.
That line's so good.
That's like the best line in the whole series.
All right,
But we'll get to that later.
so which of the new characters stood out to you the most?
Kirby.
Kirby, played by
Kirby is the best and the greatest.
former hero and current Nashville star Hayden Panettiere as
The
just
smallest human being on Earth.
yeah, she will love. She's the cool horror movie chick. Yeah, and she's great. How I loved when
She is a delight to watch on screen.
they were in the interrogation room and they're like, no, he didn't call me. Is that bad? Is that bad? And Dewey's like, no, maybe. Am I gonna die before
Yes,
these
yes,
tapes?
that was great. That was Dewey's best scene in the movie. That it's because it's sort of overly earnest in the way that only Dewey can be. That because it honestly just occurred to him in that moment, but he didn't contain it. That he's like, no, well, maybe. It's so sincere. I love him.
Well, I mean, Dewey's been at this enough times to know that there are going to be a lot more dead bodies sitting on the ground before all of this is over.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is that like at this point the three central characters have been through this enough that they are ready to recognize it as a thing and to everybody has a little bit of Randy in them now where they're kind of predicting what's going to happen based on the previous events as though they were tropes in a movie, which of course to us they are, but it doesn't really make sense as as a movie character motivation, but it would be infuriating if they didn't at the same time, which I guess is a problem that a lot of not just horror franchises but franchises in general kind of run into, is that you eventually start yelling at the characters like, come on, just get wise to what's going on already. But of course they can't, because that would mean sort of acknowledging that they're in a movie, because we don't do that. We don't base our assessments of what the future is going to be like based entirely on previous patterns, because we don't have the knowledge that we're in a somewhat formulaic franchise. We're just taking events as they come. So it's hard to figure out how to walk that line without frustrating your viewers. But Scream can do it fine because Scream is so thoroughly deconstructive. So it works out pretty good.
Yeah, in addition to Kirby, we have Rebecca Walters, played by Alison Brie, who is Sydney's PR person for her book tour, and is basically Gale without Gale's innate desire to get to the bottom of a story.
Yeah, yeah, a little bit, and without the without the sliver of humanity that Gale had that
Mhm.
was eventually developed.
She is incredibly excited about the murders, sort of the way that Gale was excited in Scream 2 about the murders starting taking place at the theater. She is ecstatic that there are more murders, and is like, this is a PR gold mine. And of course, she hasn't actually even read Sydney's book,
Yeah, figured I'd wait for the movie.
and she sort of harasses Gale for a bit. Yeah, she's just kind of awful.
She's an eminently hateable person. I
And
was going to suggest that perhaps you only liked this movie because Alison Brie was in it,
I do love Alison Brie.
but that doesn't seem fair.
Alison Brie,
As do I.
the actress is a Scream fanatic. I've seen interviews with her where she talks about how much she loves this particular franchise, and this was like her dream come true.
Oh, that's pretty rad. I didn't know that. I figured that all of the beloved actresses in the prologue were fans. You know, I would imagine that Kristen Bell and Anna Paquin and everybody else in the first 15 minutes are people who jumped at the chance to be in the new Scream movie.
All right, well, unlike Gale in any of the Scream movies, Rebecca is killed off pretty quickly, which is sort of another clue as to who the identity of the killer is, because there really aren't that many people in the rest of the cast who would know who Rebecca was other than the killer.
Yeah, and that murder only makes sense in retrospect,
Hmm.
given what we eventually learn the killer's motivations are.
Like, it's something that you don't really question. You don't question why Rebecca is getting murdered in the moment, because it's a horror movie and people get murdered in horror movies.
Yeah, but this franchise always makes every murder. There are no incidental murders in this franchise. It's not. Yeah, because the serial killers in a lot of other slasher franchise are just sort of video game mobs that just kind of wander around and kill whatever's in front of them. Whereas the killings in Scream are always very specifically motivated and have to do with who in particular the killer is. You know, which does make it a true mystery. So yeah, a lot of the killing sprees in these movies do sort of look differently with the benefit of hindsight when you know they're not just random people getting killed in the moment.
Yep. We also have Marley Shelton as Deputy Judy Hicks, who is clearly
It's
Dewey
also a delight.
and very, very creepy at a lot of scenes.
Yeah, yeah. She was one of my early suspects.
Yeah, she is so creepy in that scene with Sydney. So creepy. Where she's just in the shadows talking about
Yeah.
all the things she watched Sydney do, which of course this character has not appeared before, so it comes off as even more creepy.
Right, yeah, because we know that she was nothing in the previous three movies. But yeah, and that was yeah, well, that scene was when I stopped suspecting her because that was an obvious Scream red herring move. Because Scream always does that. It picks one or two characters to single out and make seem weirdly intimidating for for a full 3 minutes or so. But that person never turns out to be the killer. Yeah, it was the scenes before that because she's so sort of aggressively chipper in a lot of ways that I was like, hey, that would be a fitting Scream kind of knife twist if it turned out to be her for some reason. But I was wrong.
Did you think she was after Dewey romantically?
Well, that seemed pretty obvious, I thought. Um,
Yeah, she wanted Dewey. And it's like, no. Dewey is already with Gale, and you are no Gale.
Yeah, you're Dewey, which makes it even weirder. That, like you joined the police force where the chief was this weird male version of you, and developed a crush on him. Like that's weird. That's weirdly narcissistic in a way.
Yeah. And plus her lemon squares taste like
To fall in love
ass.
with your own source material.
Yeah, plus her lemon squares taste like ass.
Yeah, they don't.
You have to love, God, you have to love Gale and Dewey's back and forth throughout that scene.
Yeah,
So then we have Robbie Mercer, aka the guy who is live streaming his entire life.
yeah. Who's one of sort of two stand-ins for Randy, and I think don't they even make a joke about that, or was that just am I just remembering the joke about that in Scream 3, where the guy's playing the character that's clearly the substitute for Randy?
Yeah, I don't think they call them out.
I don't know. I can't remember.
I think there's so many characters that are basically homages to Randy in this movie that I don't think they specifically call out those two characters. But yeah, no, he's a little weird guy who keeps inappropriately asking people what their favorite scary movie is.
Yeah, and again, it's just And we've talked about this before with other characters in this franchise that he doesn't turn out to be the killer, but he probably still was a psychopath because he doesn't seem to have any real sense of empathy. The man the man wouldn't know tact if it came up and hit him in the face. Yeah, he's just kind of a weird kid, but he's not like a like a stuttering shut-in weird kid, like more like how the two killers in the first movie were weird, but they're weird in this way that also gives them this weird sort of obnoxious charisma. Yeah, he's kind of a slime ball.
Which plus he and Charlie, Robbie and Charlie are pretty mean to Gail. And no, you don't be mean to Gail.
No. No, it's one, it's disrespectful, and two, it's very ill-advised because there will be consequences.
Because Gail attempts to pump Charlie and Robbie for information, and all they want to do is talk to Sydney. And she's like, I'm Gail Weathers. I wrote the book. It's Stab, based on the book by Gail Weathers. I'm the Gail Weathers. And they're like, but what about Sydney? You can just
Yeah.
tell. You can tell in her mind she wants to put on the Ghostface mask and just stab them in that moment.
Yes. She does put on a ghost face mask later in the
She
movie.
does.
Which I was sort of surprised that I was sort of surprised that's maybe the first time that's happened in this franchise that one of the main and it's not even made a big deal of.
Hmm.
I was always expecting at some point, at some point for Sydney to end up with one on. That would have made some sense, for some crazy scene, some big showdown. But yeah, that was a little weird that wasn't made a lot of.
So Gail does get Sydney to come to their cinema club and is trying to get information out of them again. And they're like, no, we're not going to tell you. Which, rude. How are you going to have a
And
stab?
also should have been a warning.
And also, how are you going to have a stab party with the opportunity to have Gail Weathers there and not take it?
Right? Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was like, what is wrong with you people? The person who wrote the books that the franchise you're celebrating is based on is here asking to come to your party in celebration of that franchise, and you're like, nah, it's a secret. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Yeah, they're awful. They did not want Gail at their party, which winds up being for a reasonable character based reason that you would not want Gail around you pretty much. But of course, Gail being Gail does wind up at the party. And yeah, this is part of the whole thing about how kids are terrible and the fact that they love the stab movies and are quoting the lines, even though all this happened in their town to people that they know. Like again, Kirby and Dewey are know each other enough to be like driving past each other and commenting on each other and talking to each other. Well, not talking to each other, but like, "Hey Kirby, you're driving too fast," and Kirby's like, "Sorry, Sheriff." They know the people that this happened to. I mean, it's only been 15 years since the first Scream. They're terrible. Like it's a little bit
Yeah, it's a town full of jerks.
like it's a little bit well, it's a lot tasteless that the events of the original Scream were treated as sort of just a fun horror slasher in Scream 2, but now we're literally in Woodsboro and they're hanging up ghost faces and just delighting in these stab movies.
Yeah, and you just want to like kind of glare at these at these kids and be like, people died.
Lots of people
What are you
died.
doing? Yeah.
Gail winds up following them to the party, which is in an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town, and does her Gail thing of hiding cameras all over the place. Gail,
Yep, which again is a direct callback to the first movie.
except this time the killer is either watching her or knows that's what she's gonna do, and so just follows around after she's left and turns all the cameras off, which prompts her to go back into the party where she discovers dun 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 a webcam.
Ooh.
Meanwhile, Dewey's found her car and is watching her live video from the cameras, which as she's holding the camera as she's walking towards the webcam, and this is the first of at least two times where a camera is showing footage from behind them as opposed to in front of them, and the killer comes in and stabs her. And of course, Dewey, sitting there watching the car, starts yelling at her, yelling at the video of her to get away, turn around. Once more, direct callback to the original Scream.
Yep.
So how'd you feel about the entire barn sequence?
I thought it was a good set piece, And again, yeah, it does feel tonally really similar to the sequence at the party in the first Scream. Yeah, and it's yeah, and just again the whole sort of depiction of I've always wondered about this because because Wes Craven is a horror director almost across the board. It's the kind of movies that he makes, but the way that the Stab franchise is handled in these movies, especially in this one, it seems really kind of contemptuous of horror fans. Because yeah, again, just like and the way that they behave at the screening in the barn, is just sort of the height of tastelessness. And so I've wondered about that. If it's just just kind of a winking jab, or if it's actually indicative of a deeper problem with that fan base that Wes Craven might have. But I don't know.
I'm assuming that a lot of this is heightened, but I'm assuming a lot of it is also based off of like screenings for Nightmare on Elm Street, like stuff that happens at horror conventions. I don't think you could say that Wes Craven has contempt for horror fans because there are so many characters who are horror fans that the movie has such affection for, like Randy and then
Yeah,
Kirby.
that's a good point.
But I think there is some not so subtle mockery of some of the more excesses that horror fans make. I know that there was one instant where someone was dressed up as Freddy Krueger and had legitimate knives on his glove and legitimately did stab someone. So I think Wes
Oh
Craven,
shit.
and like
That answers that.
I find it doubtful that Wes Craven didn't hear about that. So I think that he is aware of all sides of what sort of horror fans are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like I said, I don't think that this franchise, which has sort of as much love for people who love horror movies, could ever be really contemptuous of those exact same people. But I think it also recognizes that some of the times those people are the worst.
Yeah, I would agree.
But yeah, no, the party gets broken up by Dewey because, of course, Gail got stabbed, and so Kirby pulls all the characters that are still alive, Jill, Charlie, and Robbie. I feel like there's one other character. She pulls them over to her house, and then Jill's ex-boyfriend, Trevor, shows up because he got a text message from Jill. And then it's sort of the second half of the big party from Scream 1 is that now that they're at Kirby's house and the killer is back on his rampage. So were there sort of anything's in house that really stood out to you?
Oh, well, this is going to be the thing, isn't it? Well, in terms of what I actually saw, it does amuse me, as it has amused me a lot in all of these movies. Just how heavy-handedly they lean on making Trevor out to be the bad guy. Even though, because I know how these movies work, and it's not going to be him. It's just they lay it on so thick, just like they did with the detective in the last movie and with Sydney's boyfriend in Scream 2. It's just they don't pull any punch for making this guy seem like he's obviously the killer, and he totally isn't. He's just a dude who's kind of intense.
Yeah, all right. Another big clue.
What are you gonna lay on me?
Trevor shows up to Kirby's house because he got a text from Jill. Jill tells him that she can't find her phone. Then later on, when Sydney shows up at Kirby's house and they are being chased by the killer, Sydney says to Jill, "Give me your phone," and Jill gives it to her.
I should have caught that.
Yep,
Oh, that's brilliant.
it is really, really brilliant.
Sneaky bastard.
I'm like, the first time I noticed, I was like,
Yeah, yeah. Again, that seems like it should have been so blindingly obvious, but yeah, I completely missed that.
I did not. I don't know when I first noticed that, but I'm like, holy shit, this movie is amazing. But yeah, they reenact a lot of different things from various Scream movies. Jill is sent to hide under the bed, while Sydney is running around on the roof, being chased by the killer. Trevor and Kirby, who have been making out earlier, Sydney gets back inside. She and Kirby lock themselves into one of the rooms, and then Sydney leaves to go find Jill, and Kirby winds up discovering Trevor duct taped to a chair. Well, first Trevor tries to get in the room, and Kirby won't let him in, and Sydney specifically says, unless you are absolutely certain you can trust him, don't let him in. And then the killer comes and
Yeah, which again, like she knows what's up.
yeah, no, you don't never ever ever doubt Sydney when she tells you to do something in one of these movies. The killer comes up, smashes Trevor's head into the window, and then they play the traditional game of horror movie trivia, which ends with
Yeah, which again, like, feels like a classic Scream trope, but that hasn't really been a thing in these movies since the first one. You know, it's referenced in the other two. I mean, this is the first time that it's really been brought back the way it was in the first one, which is really cool.
and the last question is name the famous horror movie that was remade, and then the killer doesn't get to finish because Kirby just starts
Right.
rattling off like 24 horror movie remakes. And of course, like we were talking about this the
Yeah,
last
which
time,
that
which
that that seemed like the most obviously that Wes Craven was stating his opinions in the whole movie.
yeah, which he included several remakes of his movies in that list.
Yeah.
And of course, we talked about this in the last movie. Kirby thinks that the killer is on the up and up and that she has beat him because the killer is going to play by the rules. I'm like, Kirby, you should have watched Scream. You should have
Kirby.
watched Kirby. You should have watched Stab 3 much closer and realized that the killer is not going to play by the rules. And so she goes out to rescue Trevor, and of course, Trevor stabs her. R.I.P. Kirby.
No, no, not Trevor.
Yeah, no, it's Trevor.
Not Trevor, the other guy.
No, Robbie's the
Is
one
it?
with the head.
Wait, no.
Robbie's the one with the camera on his head.
Right.
Trevor's the one with the long hair that
Wait,
loves.
no, no.
No, oh
No,
shit.
no, isn't
It
Trevor
and then
isn't Trevor the ex who
no,
they were gonna
and then
blame for the whole thing?
Charlie stabs her. I wonder how many times I said Trevor
Right.
during that.
Yeah.
I really hope I did not say Trevor all the way through that entire.
I think it was only like once.
Yeah,
I think it was only the once because it jumped out at me. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
Charlie's the kid with the long hair. Trevor is the ex with the jeans. Who's the red herring.
Charlie up and stabs her in the gut. R.I.P. Kirby. You should have paid better attention to Stab 3. Killer's not going to follow
Yeah.
the game. So, what did you think about Charlie as the killer?
Well, he's very reminiscent, as it turns out, of the secondary killer from the first Scream, the one who isn't Billy Loomis.
Stu.
Yeah, Stu. You know, because he's kind of a similar sort of weaselly, squirrely little guy. But yeah, I didn't suspect him at all up to that point because he doesn't really seem to be that big of a deal in the rest of the movie. He's just kind of around. But yeah, I thought he was fun as a killer. Again, nobody touches the killer from Scream 2, but he was pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, he is definitely. Basically, we talked about Randy coming off like a killer in the first movie, and I mean that's what they do here is that they make Randy the killer because he's the most Randy character out of everyone without any of Randy's good qualities.
Right.
There isn't really that much to say about him as the killer. He's just
Yeah. Yeah. He's another.
he's the secondary killer, and so there really isn't this franchise has had interesting secondary killers, but they're not the most deep characters.
Yeah, they're just kind of entertaining most of the time.
Which then, of course, that leads to Sydney discovering the main killer, who is, of course, Jill, the clear Sydney analog.
What a twist!
Yeah, what a twist that in the remake, Sydney and Randy were the killers. So how'd you feel about Jill?
Yeah, yeah. I thought Jill was awesome as a final villain for the movie and for the franchise. You know, especially given kind of the weird structure of the movie, which again, the characters call out that the third act is weirdly prolonged. I thought she was really fun to watch. I thought her motivations were interesting. She was delightfully insane.
Yeah. No, she did it for the Instagram followers. She did it for the Instagram followers.
Essentially, yeah.
Which
Before that was really a thing.
I'm kind of on the fence with her because like the previous movies have teased that there is no motive or they're doing it because of violence in the media or something like that. And then been like, no, we're gonna have a good old fashioned revenge in here. But she's legitimately just doing it to be famous and have fans and write a book about herself like Sydney.
But there's revenge in there. She resents Sydney for the impact that being related to Sydney had on her life. You know, and as we pointed out, some of the other killings were for revenge or for, you know, to help out with this plot to be famous. So it isn't. And it isn't like there's no traditional motive.
One of the more amusing things about it is that she wants to co-write a book with Gail about her experiences. She is off the wall insane and thinking that she can be herself a local celebrity victim.
Yeah. Although she nearly pulls it off. If she had managed to actually kill Sydney, it seems like it would have worked out great.
But yeah, she sets it up so that it looks like Trevor, her ex-boyfriend, is the killer. And of course, in the process, shoots him in the dick and then through the head. And then murders the hell out of Charlie. And then proceeds to do a whole lot of damage to herself. What do you think about her, like,
Yeah, that sequence was weird. Like that was sort of her at her craziest, I thought. Just because it is so weird to watch this person have this sort of it's like watching somebody have a scuffle with somebody that isn't there. It's like, okay, you know that this is all very deliberate and this all has to do with her plan, but this is still legitimately a crazy thing to do. So yeah, I thought that scene really hammered home just how not all there Jill is.
yeah, well, it is way more elaborate than, like, if you pay attention to what the injuries look like throughout the Scream movies, Dewey, of course, gets horribly mutilated every single movie, but Gail and Sydney usually only get like one knife wound or a gunshot wound or something really small and minor. But she is going hog wild on like making sure she looks like an incredible wreck for when she's found.
Yeah, which then, because these movies are always very cleverly structured, then ties into placing them both in the hospital for the actual climax.
Yeah, what'd you think about that climax?
I thought it was really cool, and again, it's Gail, right, that comments on this. That was like the climax happened back at the house. This is just silly,
Yeah.
or something like that. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. I was legitimately worried at first that Sydney had actually died. So, first of all, I was just glad that turned out not to be the case. And I thought it was satisfying given that Jill, for however short a time, did manage to fool everybody, that it's nice that again, even before the truth comes out for everybody, that she gets to have a showdown with the whole main cast, with not just Sydney, but also Gail and Dewey, so that they know what's going on, and they know who the actual killer was. So I really appreciated that. Again, it is structurally a little weird, but I thought as a scene, it was one of the best sequences in the movie.
Yeah, particularly, of course, Sydney's classic line, "Don't mess with the original."
Yes, yeah, that is a line for the ages.
Yeah, there are a lot of.
Although, of course, it is not actually the line that the killer goes out on, because the killer has to have their miraculous resurrection and subsequent repeated dispatchment, which this movie's version of that is so stupid, is just so astonishingly ridiculous that it's kind of amazing.
Any other thoughts about Scream 4 as a whole?
It's really fun. It's a really cool kind of comment on and revisitation of the franchise. Neve Campbell is really, really pretty.
But she's probably got a lot of scars.
Right, I have scars. No, I meant like actual scars. Oh, isn't this the second? No, I'm thinking of Trick or Treat. This is the second time on this podcast that we've covered a movie in which somebody from Battlestar Galactica gets killed.
Good old Mary McConnell as Jill's mother, who had to
Yeah,
die,
yeah.
who had to die because Sydney's mother died. Which, I mean, that shows you how much of a
Right.
sociopath Jill
What?
is. Is that the only reason why she kills her mother
Yeah, that's
is because of the fact that she wants to become Sydney.
yeah. What? Yeah, it's a pretty awesome movie, which is par for the course. These are all pretty awesome movies.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great franchise. So let's talk about Scream 4 as a cap on this franchise. We talked about this a lot up front, but I think it definitely demonstrates how vital Scream is as a horror franchise. That they could take 11 years off and still have sort of these fascinating characters and a rich universe and still make a very, very good horror movie. Like, it might not be as good as Scream 1 or 2, but it
Yeah.
is still a good movie.
Yeah, I agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah, and like I said, I kind of gave my thoughts on its status as an end to the franchise earlier in the episode. That it does function better as sort of a revisitation, because the end to the franchise is Scream 3. That
Mhm.
that kind of final sequence is the end of that story. And this is deliberately kind of a separate thing. It's a look back. It's a look in on what these characters are doing now.
Would you be up
Yeah.
for
So, and as that I think it functions very well.
would you be up for maybe it's 2017 now in 2021 there being Scream 5?
I mean, seems like you couldn't do that forever. That would start to get a little silly because I don't know if there's enough material to make a sort of meta commentary on reboots of reboots. But I guess they could probably pull it off, and I'm always down to see these characters again. But yeah, I think as it stands, I think the franchise could stand just as it is, and be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think like we talked about earlier. I don't think that Scream 4 is necessary. And that might not be the exact perfect word, but I don't think Scream, the first trilogy of movies, desperately begging for that it had anything really unresolved to it. But I think that it is incredibly rewarding to sort of revisit with these characters, particularly as it had been 11 years since we last saw them. I mean, you've seen all these movies in the span of a couple of weeks. For the people who first saw them in the 90s, it had been 11 years, and it's like, oh, we get more time with Gail, Dewey, and Sydney.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a movie that we didn't have to watch, but it's a movie that we get to watch. And I'm glad that we get to watch it.
Like, I am glad that 10 years after all the first three movies, I mean, Gail, Dewey, and Sydney are still chugging along with their lives and in their own way in good places.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
even we talked a little bit about Gail not necessarily finding her place, but we can be reasonably certain she's going to write a book about the events of Scream 4.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point actually. Yeah, I guess that's the implication. Yeah, so it leaves everybody in a fitting place, but still in motion. They're still getting on with things and still developing. Which is the cool thing about this franchise
Mhm.
is that the characters are always changing and are always continuing to make peace with different things. So in some ways it's really fitting to end on a slightly sort of ambivalent note because it means that they're gonna keep doing that.
Yeah, all right, let's get to our final segment, Best Death. So who had the best death in this movie?
Jill, which we didn't. I don't think these podcasts are particularly listenable even for people who haven't seen the movie. But we didn't actually go over what happens to her, which is that once she revives and is threatening the characters again, Sydney is on the floor behind her and grabs the defibrillators, and Gail sees what she's doing, and I forget the context of it, but it amounts to her saying, "Well, I guess there's only one thing left to say." She's like,
I think
clear, and
it,
she electrocutes her in the brain,
yeah, I think Jill asks
which
her
is
if she
pretty
has
glorious.
Jill asks her if she has the last word or something like that, and Gail's like,
Right? Yeah, 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 yeah. That's
just
that's what
one
it is.
word, clear.
Yeah. It's so ridiculous, but it's so good. And comes out of nowhere. It's not a callback to anything. It's not a callback to anything in the movie or in the other movies. It's
Yeah, because like the garage door kill from
uh
the very beginning of the movie is a clear reference to Tatum's garage door kill from the first movie, whereas electrocuting
yeah.
someone with defibrillator paddles, not a callback to anything. That's just let's come up with a
No,
way to kill.
no. It was just
It was just
yeah, it
let's
was
come
just
up.
something that Wes thought would be fun to do.
I'm gonna go with Jill's death too. It was pretty spectacular, very drawn out, and much deserved because she was not a nice person, to put it mildly.
No, she was not.
All right, so I guess this is the last time we have to warn people about using landlines. That's sad.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and nobody uses landlines really all that much in this movie.
Yeah.
It's just, I guess that people still just don't have caller ID.
Well, they have caller
Oh
ID. It's
well,
just
no, because
the
no,
killer
it's
keeps
a big.
stealing people's phones.
Yeah, it's a thing in this movie. Yeah,
That
that
Jill and Charlie keep.
Ghostface here is stealing people's phones.
So don't get your phone stolen. Keep track of your
Yeah,
phone, because if you lose your phone, a serial killer is going to be
yeah.
calling all of
That's
your
like
friends.
actually good advice. Like there aren't really benefits to not using landlines beyond making sure that you get a call from a serial killer, whereas not stealing, not letting your phone get stolen is just good advice in general.
Yeah, I mean, and you never know how many serial killers have stolen your phone. You've got to keep track of that thing because otherwise, serial killers are just going to be calling your friends left and right and then popping out of closets to murder you.
Yeah, it's just It's not a good idea.
So I have been Peter.
I've been Tim.
Have a great night and enjoy your screaming. Bye bye.
So long.